Okay, folks. So we're back at this. We've spent some time working with low contrast letters. So now what we want to work with is what we call a high contrast letter, and specifically, I'm going to work with serifs on this one. Now you could do low contrast serifs, and you could do high contrast sans serifs too. I just, I did my low contrast was a serif, my high contrast is going to be a sans, or excuse me, a low contrast was a sans serif, my high contrast is going to be a serif. So again, low contrast means that there is the same weight in the letter forms, but a high contrast, on the other hand, is going to go ahead and give us letter forms that might look something like this in the end. So to have really thick parts and then really thin parts, that's what we call a high contrast serif. Okay? So what we do have is we have weight that goes in the downstroke for diagonals. So what is a downstroke for a diagonal? What's an upstroke for a diagonal? Well, generally speaking, when I create the letter A, I start from this standpoint, so and I go up, so that's an upstroke. And generally, I pull down, so that's a downstroke. So that means that I would have a thicker stroke in this part of the A. Okay? High contrast generally has thick strokes on verticals, like I see in my H, and thin strokes in horizontals, and crossbars, things like that. Serifs can be on horizontal or vertical strokes, and or they can be, kind of vertical serifs on curved strokes. So if I go ahead and I have an S, instead of having a serif that goes like this, okay, that would be something we don't want to do. So if I have an S, I could have a serif that goes up and down like that. And we have options for certain letters like Y's and A's and even X's. So we have some options that we're going to play around with here. So let's get right into it. Start with our baseline, our cap height. And if you're wondering why I do everything in capital letters, I don't. I just I start with that usually just because it's the easiest thing for folks to work with. So anyway, because it's funny because from a design standpoint, I avoid all caps like the plague. So anyway, let's go ahead and let's play around with the concept of some high contrast serifs. We'll take a look at an H. Okay. Now, as I mentioned before, an H. What I want to do is two things here. One, I want to go ahead and I want to have thicker and weight applied to my vertical parts of my letter, right? So that's going to be a thicker weight. But the other thing that I want to do, that I need to point out, is I want to go ahead and I want to put my serif on here. Now, before I actually do it there, let's just kind of play around here and talk about serifs in general. Here, I'll zoom out a little bit. So I can have a serif, let's say this is the end of a letter form, right? I can have serifs do all sorts of things. I can have a kind of a rounded serif that goes a little something like this. I can have a big, heavy-duty, what we call slab serif that looks like this, or I could have a rounded slab. A little bit of both worlds, right? So I could play around with different kinds of serifs. Depending on what you create, depends on the kind of serifs you're going to make. You could even go ahead and just for giggles as you're playing around, You could even just have your serifs just be lines like that. That could work too. That's not a bad idea. You can start with those lines, then you can turn them into these curved parts after the fact as well. I feel though that when I have a decent amount of weight, my serif should be able to hold up that letter form. So I at least will go ahead and probably end up somewhere in between this one here, in between this one here and this one here usually. So I will go ahead and I'll start to make those serifs. And again, all they are these little tails or these little feet. Okay? That's what we're looking here for. Now, the cool thing about serifs is, you know, history has it that they were created to help, you know, cover up mistakes. So let's do that same thing with them. And if they're not 100% perfect, that's okay as long as they've got a good feel to them. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create these serifs here. I'm doing it kind of quick, so they definitely need some work. But I think you get the sense of what's going on here. And I'm going to fill this in. Okay? And again, not perfect by any stretch of the imagination here. Just filling it in so you can kind of feel a heavier weight. And here's one of the cool things that I like messing around with these things, right? So I'm going to do an H and I'm going to do an A. So my H, right? I don't want just a line, okay? Well, that could work. It's too thin. I need a little bit more than that. So that is a nice strong H. By all means, that can work. So let's try something else. Let's try an A, right? So remember, I want my weight to go on my downward stroke. So let's go ahead and my upward stroke is going to be a single kind of thin line, right? My downward stroke is really where that weight's going to go. And remember what I was doing in one of the previous videos where I went ahead and I pulled my stroke out and then I kind of, you know, thought that I was going to go a little bit this way, a little bit that way, right? I thought about that. I'm doing that same thing here. So I still do that same kind of concept when I make a lot of these things. Now, here's the fun part, right? Serifs, right? So there is going to be a serif that's going to kind of fix this kind of like weird meeting here. It's going to go right off of that, come right across here. Okay? And then I'll have a serif come here, and a serif right here. Yep. And this line, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to make a little bit thicker. Just like I did there, right? Just enough so I can have a serif hanging out there, hanging out right there. Okay? Now, let's go ahead and fill this in really quick. Okay, so now we know, based on our previous videos, that if that's the center point, right here, that I want to probably come down a little bit, right? And I can go right across here like that. That is without a doubt something I can do. And that's a pretty strong looking A right there, right? It's got some panache to it. It's got some style to it. And it looks stronger than that A, for sure, okay? But let's go ahead and let's take this a step further, because I can, right? I don't have to follow that strict guideline that is there. Instead, I'm going to have a little fun. And this is, again, this is indicative of what I was saying before. Hand lettered type, you get to make your own rules, right? So I'm going to put a little bit of curve in here. So check this out. And there we go. Now that kind of like harkens back to like, you know, Industrial Revolution, turn of the century kind of type that you would see on signs, you know, in England and France and all throughout those cities in Europe. You would see letter forms that would look like that. You would see what we call these extra flourishes on them. Do not be afraid to do those sorts of things. Those things can be done. Just like, you know, we didn't draw one yet, the letter X tends to look like that, right? Okay, that's cool. But let's go ahead and let's think about, like, you know, what an X could be here. So, just like before, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have my first angle that comes from the bottom up, right? That's going to be the thin one. And then I'm going to have this one here, and this is going to be the thick one. So by all means, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this the way one would expect. And just to kind of speed up the process here a little bit, I'm not going to fully color these things like I did the H and the A. I'm just going to go ahead and put these serifs in place. A little thicker, just enough to hold the serif. Okay? That's what an X could look like, right? For sure. Hacks. Did I accidentally make a word up again? I don't think I did. Cool. So anyway, so that's one way in which we can do an X. But check this out, right? I'm going to go ahead and make another X. So I'm going to do my downward diagonal. So that's going to be my thick one, right? Put my serifs on there. And I think I'm going to fill this one in all the way like I did the H and the X, just because I think it's going to look cool. I got a pretty fun plan. All right. Now, I could go straight across, but instead of doing that, I'm going to try this. I'm going to have this line going up here. Just like that, again with enough weight on it to support a serif. Alright, and instead of coming this way with it, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come right about over here. And again, just thick enough to support the serif. There I go. And check that out. That's a whole different kind of X, but it's still an X. And this is the stuff I'm talking about, right? We can go ahead and we can play around with certain letter forms and we can have variation. So please, please, please play around with that, Okay? How about a curve? They're always fun, right? So, what we want to do with the curves is we want to pick a side. So I'll start out with an O, just like this. Okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one side to be thin, which generally is your right side, and then I'm going to pick one other side to be thick, which generally speaking is your left. I've seen it the other way around, but this tends to be what you see more of. And the reason why you see more of the heavier part on your left than your right is because think about your other circular letter forms, like C's and G's. They need a visual, they need a weight on the side. So again, if I want a C, right, I'm going to do the same exact thing. Go ahead and make that O, right? Assumption. Except I'm going to put part of it out. I don't need that whole thing. That's actually, I'm going to rework that one. There we go. That's more like it. Thicker on one side than the other. Okay, and since it's a serif, and since it's a curve, I'm going to put what we call a vertical serif on here. And it's going to look a little something like this. You can choose to have it only on one side or to have it on both. It's 100% up to you. I choose usually just, I tend to put on both. I see people put it on only one side. I think it looks kind of weird. The only thing that I would point out is that you got to be careful. You don't accidentally make it look like a G. It's really a C. So those are some different letter forms. Again, this is a high contrast serif font, right? And we're working with serifs, and we did a couple round ones here, and we did a couple more of your generic ones, right? But we played around. We got a little funkier. We've got some swashes in here. Had some alternate letters. The Y's could be alternate, N's and M's can be alternates. So yeah, experiment with that. Experimentation is going to be key. And just like before, I want you to come up with a word, okay? Actually, a couple words. So play around with different letter forms, and then we will come up with, again, 3 words. 5 letters or more, and start to create these things. And the next video I will make a word out of these letter forms, just so I'm doing this stuff with you too. Thank you.